Good morning. It's a crazy old coot here. How you doing? Let's continue on now with the next part on how to build your PC picking parts. Yes, we're going to pick parts. After your graphics card, it's the CPU. So now you got to decide between the AMD Ryzens or the Intels of the world. And are you doing an absolutely pure gaming build, or are you going to be doing gaming / workstation, or gaming and streaming? So you've got to decide these things in advance. i5 8400 is about $180, and it gives you 6 cores, 6 threads, and it is a very good gaming CPU. Okay. On the other hand, the R5 2600X is around $220. It's 6 core and it's 12 threads. It comes with a decent cooler. It has better multi-core performance, slightly worse gaming. So basically is 10 to 20 frames per second when we're talking about over 100. If you want those 10 or 20 frames per second, then you need to go Intel. If you'd rather give up those 10 or 20 frames per second and be able to stream and or render videos or whatever really well, then you're going to go with the R5 2600X or CPUs that are higher and lower. I mean, you can go with the 8700K and you can go with the 2700X, and those cost a lot more. So there's a lot to decide, and you got to sit down and decide, where you're going to spend your money. What are you trying to build this for? Motherboards. We all love our motherboards, right? Motherboards come in many different flavors, and the first 2 flavors you need to choose is whether you have an Intel CPU or an AMD CPU. If you have an Intel CPU, you need to get a motherboard that is specific for the Intel CPUs. The CPU, you got to make sure that your motherboard is compatible with your CPU. The B360 motherboards right now are going between $80 and $100. Now on the AMD side, usually most motherboards will support all the Ryzen CPUs. Now some of the real small cheap ones, I don't think I would put an R5 2700X CPU in. But other than that, you're probably pretty good. And the motherboards for the AMDs are going for $150 to $200 and probably higher, depending on how fancy you want to get. Now, the B350 boards haven't come out yet. They come out at the end of July 2018, and I expect them to be $20 either side of $100. How many DIMM slots do you need? Well, you need at least 2, and most motherboards come with them, luckily, because you've got dual band memory. Now the question is do you need 4 slots? Now if you start with 2 sticks of 4 gigabyte memory for 8 gigabyte total, and in the future you want to go to 16 gigabyte, then you want to have 4 slots so you can put 2 more sticks in. Other than that, you should be good. How many PCIe slots? Now most of them have 116 and 1/8. A couple of other slots times ones. You can usually, how many do you need? 1 for your graphics card and maybe a sound card or some other weird card that you want. Video capture card maybe? I'm not sure, but that's pretty much all. I never have more than 1 my graphics card in my PCIe slots. I used to have a wireless, but now I've got wireless on board, so you don't have to worry about that. And then you have how many M.2 connectors. All of them usually have at least 1. A lot of them have 2. You have to make sure that you have as many M.2 connectors as you are going to use. Then you get to the USB ports. Tons and tons of USB ports. Pretty USB ports of all different flavors. And you have to look and see if the motherboard that you want to choose has the type and the amount of USB ports that you need. Like I talked about earlier, is wireless. Is there wireless built on motherboard, or are you going to have to add in a wireless card if you want to go wireless? Now we're getting into some tricky stuff, and it's a little bit harder research. You're going to have to go onto YouTube and Google the motherboard and see and make sure that it has decent VRMs. You don't want a motherboard with cheap VRMs, especially if you're going to do any overclocking or stressing. Like if you've got a 6-core or 8-core Ryzen and you're going to overclock it, you want to make sure that your VRMs are not going to overheat and die on you. Lastly, it's actually pretty important is, especially if you're going to use the onboard sound. Does it have a good quality onboard sound chip? This is important because like your monitor is what you see. Your sound chip is going to produce the sound that you're going to hear. So you want to make sure you have a decent sound chip. That should wrap it up for motherboards. So after that, this is you're going to pick up your DDR4 memory. So how many gigabytes? Okay, if you're doing just a gaming rig, you only need about 8. I would pick up 2 4-gigabyte sticks, and that way if you want to add, you have room to add if you've got a 4-slot motherboard, and we'll get into that later. So it's how many gigabytes, how many sticks, what speed. Speed is important, okay? Not so much with the Intels from what I've been told, no personal experience on that. So if you get 2800 or around there, it's not above that isn't really going to affect you very much. On Ryzen, you want to get at least 3000 memory stick. After your memory speed, your cache latency becomes important. 14 is better than 16. Okay. A stick of 3014 is better than a stick of 3016. Okay. And you will tell this by the price. Okay. If you were dealing with Ryzen, you're going to want to get Samsung B die because that's the best die for Ryzen systems. It just seems to work a lot better. Now you're getting into solid state drives, okay? I do not recommend regular old HDD drives. They're a thing of the past. If you want one for storage, that's fine. But for active memory, you don't want that. You want a solid state drive, okay? So now you got to decide between M.2 or your 2.5-inch size SSDs. And then you got to decide whether if it's M.2, you got NVMe or SATA, and then you got to decide how big you want. Personally, I wouldn't go below 250 gigabytes. Okay, my preferred size is 500 gigabytes. NVMe is a lot faster than SATA. Would you really notice the difference? They're both really fast. Maybe if you're doing a lot of transferring and stuff, then NVMe is where you want to go. But if you want to save money and still have a pretty quick system, I would go with a SATA style drive. So there's, again, a lot of things you can have to consider, especially when you get into M.2, because you got to make sure that the M.2 drive that you select, your motherboard is the right slot for it. And these have been pretty standardized. I guess earlier it used to be a problem. They'd have different types. Pretty much now everything is universal. After you decide what solid state drive you're going to use, you got to pick your power supply. The first thing you need to decide is how many gigawatts do you need. Joking aside, to size your power supply, there are multiple online websites that will help you pick what size power supply you need to get. So you go through and you tell it, what type motherboard, what CPU, how much memory, your video cards, your storage, what you're going to use for storage, your keyboard, mouse, and any other device. You hit the calculate button, it comes up with a number. You'll be pretty much surprised because it's going to be probably a lot lower than you think. If you want to get quick and dirty, just get a 600 gold power supply and cross your fingers. After you decide how many watts you need, you got to decide whether you want gold, silver, or bronze. And obviously, the higher up the food chain, the more they cost. I personally would never go below a bronze unless it's for a real cheap office computer that's not going to see boo for power consumption. And then you got to, after you decide that, you got to decide what style connectors, whether you're going to go modular, semi-modular, or non-modular. That depends on how picky you want to look, the inside of your case look. So if you're going to have a glass case and everybody's going to see the inside of your computer with all the LED glory, you probably want to go modular so you can limit how much wiring you have inside. If you're not quite so picky, you may go semi-modular, which is usually it's your CPU power is hardwired, and then the rest is modular. So, I mean, you're going to have to hook up power to your motherboard. You know, having that non-modular is not that big of a deal. And then you got full non-modular, which is usually the cheaper version, and it's got all the wires, and you have to curl up and hide the ones that you don't want to use. Again, always check reviews. Make sure it doesn't overheat. What kind of fan, maybe if it's noisy or not, depending on how picky you are. Like again, what I choose would be maybe different from you because your needs and wants are different than mine. Well, that wraps it up for this video. This is your crazy old coot wishing you a good evening.